So based on the fact that for the last 5 years I've been banging on about, well, all you need is bottom baits and mono rigs, what on earth am I doing fishing with a stiff hinge rig? Especially considering that every carp I've caught on the river has pretty much been on a bottom bait, until now. It's the age old question, isn't it? Well, what's better, mate? Bottom baits or pop-ups? I still stick to my guns that most of the time all you need is a straightforward bottom bait out of the bag. You don't need wafters, pop-ups, critically balanced, whatnots. But it just so happens that I've decided to fish a swim on the river this year where bottom baits, well, it's not such a good idea. My normal classic heavy duty mono rigs are getting snagged on the bottom. It's a rocky swim. I've got zebra mussels out there and the zebra mussels stick on the rocks. Whenever I've tried to fish this swim, I've caught from here before on bottom baits, but 50% of the time my rig gets stuck on the bottom, on the retrieve, and that's a problem. I'm fishing with super strong gear, 40-pound main line with a heavy duty leader at the business end, and that is strong enough for me to be able to bend the hook point open, which is great. I get the gear back. I hate leaving any gear in the river. Do I really want to be fishing in a manner where 50% of the time I'm going to have to bend a hook point open in order to get my rig back? Well, it got me thinking, maybe there's a better way. And if I fish a pop-up rig, there is. So I'm using a pop-up to protect the hook point from the bottom. Not because it's pink, not because I believe a pop-up is inherently more attractive than a bottom bait, because I don't believe that. It's simply to protect the hook point. Quite a few years ago now I made a video on how to tie the stiff hinge, and I've got to be honest, we made the video, I did some test fishing, we put it out there, and is it a rig that I use regularly in my carp fishing? No. Why am I using it in this swim? The stiff hinge is robust, it's anti-tangle. I need those properties in this swim. I can't fish a supple braid in flowing water. I've tried it, it doesn't work. The rigs get tangled. There's bream out there, there's chub out there, and they'll play football with the baits anyway, so it's just not a good idea. The other problem with something like the stiff hinge is that you can't just hook on a PVA stick. When you cast it, the force of the impact on that PVA stick, it's going to straighten the shod element, and that's no good because you need that curve element in the shod rig to make it as effective as the stiff hinge can be. So I've got to solve that problem. Also in the past I found the actually forming the curve didn't get on with them. I could never get the hook to sit vertically. Somehow it always went on a curve and it wasn't working for me, and it stopped me trying shod link materials, but I've found one that I actually quite like. I can actually see the benefits of the stiff hinge. One of the reasons why I've never really liked rigs like the stiff hinge is that, well, for me they're slow and complicated to tie. You know, slow and complicated is not what I need in my fishing. It distracts me from what I need to be focusing on, which is just making sure those hooks are razor sharp and getting on the fish. So the challenges of this swim has forced me to have a fresh look really at the stiff hinge and see if I can, knowing what I know now, do it better. Can you make the stiff hinge better? And what I've decided to do is, if you consider the boom element of the stiff hinge to be something that it's almost attached to the rod. Well, of course it's attached to the rod, but if you separate that and don't make that a changeable element. So what I've been doing is I've been pre-tying a short mono shod link and not tying a knot on that. Just leave it bare, cut off, of the right length, ready to manually tie on each time fresh to the micro swivel. And to do that, what I've got to do is I've got to put the balance weight for the pop-up on the boom. So if you're going to set up a stiff hinge like that with a replaceable shod link element and then effectively a completely reusable boom that doesn't get changed, you need a really robust material. The carp in here are absolute trains. I'm fishing for river carp, 30, 40, 50 pound, maybe even a 60 in here. Absolute animals. The 33 that I had last week pulled my arms off. It took 15 minutes of combat. The material I've chosen for that is it's called Skin Link. It's a coated braid. It's got a Kevlar core in it, and I've got some river carping customers that I've guided in the past, and they use it a lot. It makes for a very, very robust hook link. The thing about a coated braid, if you're going to be reusing it, it's okay to have a nick in the coating because the strength comes from the actual core itself. The coating is protecting the core, if you like. Despite the fact that I'm always banging on, you don't need coated braid, la la la, yeah, I'm using coated braid. And the downside of using coated braid is you've got to steam it. Yeah, you know, if you don't want to buy coated braid and you just want to use a bog standard mono for a boom material, then yeah, no issues with doing that. I could use the same material as I'm using for my leader, just mono snag leader, 0.50, 0.60, a very robust leader material, but just like with my leader, I'm going to have to inspect that and change it more regularly. At the end of the day, it's a choice, and I've just decided to use coated braid without any of the coating stripped back because I need something super robust that I can reuse cast after cast, fish after fish, being really very confident that it's going to not let me down. At the end of the day, I still stick to my guns that pop-ups won't catch you more fish. You don't need complicated rigs like the stiff hinge, except in the one or two instances when you do, and it just so happens that the swim I'm in, yeah, it's a really useful rig. So if that's the sort of fishing that you're doing, then great. But if it's not, simple mono rigs and bottom bait is all you really need. So I've got 4 stiff hinges ready to go, and then I've got some spare boom sections tied up. So job 1 is to connect one of these rigs to my mainline swivel, and to do that I'm going to use a short anti-tangle sleeve, and I've just got a loop, and that loop is just tied with a simple overhand knot. You don't need anything fancy, especially when you're using a heavy coated braid like Skin Link. So that's the full rig attached to the lead system, and well, it might look alright, but it's a bit of a mess at the moment. This is all in a big curve, so we're going to have to steam this material straight, and we're going to have to put a nice curve into that as well, because it's not going to catch much as is. And right after you've steamed it, you want to hang it vertically like this. If you let it go cold in a curve, it's just going to go back to that curve. So my starting point for the stiff hinge is a beautifully straight steamed rig like that. Then we can worry about curving the end section later. So I always pre-make my sticks in advance, and that's the Monster Shrimp stick mix, and it's been knocked up with the bait soak. So the bait soak's PVA friendly, and you don't need much of it. Just a couple of spoonfuls in the mix, and that's made a good load of sticks. Mega attractive. Those are just sat on some 24mm freebies, which are going to fire out with a catapult. So one of the problems with a stiff hinge rig is that it's quite difficult to use it with a PVA stick. I could take that off there, and I could thread that all the way on there and sit that there. It's an option for sure, but tell you what, getting that loop to go through a tightly compacted stick like that is not easy. You're likely to break filaments, and it's just a bit fiddly. We could forget the PVA stick altogether and just cast that out as is and fish over a spreader bait. That's a classic way of fishing the stiff hinge rig, but I like the extra attraction of a PVA stick, especially when I'm river carping. So, well, why don't I just do what I always do with my bog standard mono rigs and hook on a stick? Well, let's do that. And the problem is going to be, when I cast that out, the PVA stick is going to hit the water. The lead pulling on this end is then going to straighten out this shod element. If it pulls hard enough, if you're fishing at big enough range, or if you're using a big enough stick, it'll straighten that out so badly that you might lose the curve. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to install a PVA stick so that it sits in there. So in order to do that, what we're going to take is some narrow PVA tape. I'm going to take quite a long length of that. I'm going to take 20 centimeters. I thread it through the stick. I then pass it through the large eye of a micro ring swivel. I then loop to loop the stick on. That attaches the stick firmly at that end there. I can then tie an overhand knot in the PVA just on the other side of the stick. I can then hook the hook in the PVA, bury the point of the hook, and then a couple of granny knots over the hook to hold that very securely in place. And the result is this. It casts brilliantly. It will not tangle. You can use it at any range. There is no force being put on the shod element that is going to straighten out that element. So when that goes in place, It's going to land on the bottom like that. That pop-up will just pop up like that. And then the PVA is going to melt, and that's going to release the pop-up bunk so that it sits like that above a melted PVA stick. So there we go, that's ready to chuck. So this next step isn't obligatory by any means, but if you've got any extra juice that you can put on it, then it's always a good idea to do that. This is just a bit of cloud juice. I'm fishing in 3 meters of water, so nice thing about that is it will kick off a signal higher up in the column and leak it downstream. So I've already pre-clipped up this rod at the right distance. So all I'm going to do is hit my mark, feel the lead down and flick on the alarm. Dunk. So I'm fishing with 40-pound highline braid, which is a neutral buoyancy braid. It neither sinks nor floats. Mega abrasion resistance, and I've got a 5 meter snag leader on there as well. And yes, it is bright yellow, which is very useful on the river, because the other day I was connected to a very angry common and a boat came through the swim, and because I was actually able to see where the line was going, I was able to avoid disaster. Right, that's ready to rock. There's no stretch in this braid, which is great because I can control the fish instantly, but it means if I get my clutch setting wrong and my pod isn't nailed down, I'm going to lose the rod. So the test is this: I'm not touching the pod or I'm not touching the rod. I've got good hold of the braid and I'm going to rip it off like that. So that simulates a savage take, and the takes on the river are absolutely that savage, but it doesn't half hook them. They ain't going to drop off. There we go, ready to rock. Now I've not got these fishing too tight in terms of the line tension, because I want a chance for that 1 meter of rig tubing to actually sit on the deck as best as possible. So the other one's sunk down nicely already. If that other one doesn't settle to the same height, I just pay a bit more line off. The left one is now looking very similar in terms of curve to the right one, so yeah, I'm happy with that. My left-hander is absolutely ripped off. What a way to open my 2025 river carping campaign. Unbelievable. What a creature. 33 pounds, taken on a tiny little 12mm monster shrimp pop-up and some bottom baits over the top. Bloody brilliant. So what have I got against pop-ups? Why am I always telling anglers you don't need them, just use a bottom bait? Well, for the last 15 years in my day job, and my day job is helping anglers on holiday catch, I just see so many mistakes being made whenever a pop-up is introduced into the rig side. If you understand how to set up a pop-up correctly, how to shot it right, and you check the balance every time you put one out, then of course pop-up's going to work. But if you get one thing wrong, you may as well chuck them up a tree, really. I don't think of it as pop-up being better than a bottom bait or a bottom bait being better than a pop-up. It's about using what's required to get the job done. In my fishing and helping anglers catch fish, if you just get them using a bottom bait correctly, that's all you ever need, unless you've got a very specific problem to solve. So my wife asked me a great question this morning, and that question was, well, why aren't you just using a pop-up version of the mono rig? A video that we shared a number of years ago, it was 0.40 mono, squeeze a split shot in the right way on that rig and you've got a pop-up rig. It works. The problem is that 0.40 material is not going to cut it in this situation. I've tried it and I've been cut off. What I need 0.50 or more really. It's difficult to make a pop-up rig with 0.50 mono without having some kind of hinge or some kind of supple section. The pop-up weight is going to be a long way back in order to get it up off the deck, and if it's not up off the deck, then it's not solving the problem that I need it to solve, which is I don't want the hook to snag on the mussels. Right, let's have a look at the rods that I was using last night in the river. I was really losing the light when I packed up last night, so I don't normally travel back with my rigs on my rods. It's never a very clever idea, but it was needs must last night. Right, so that's separated there. So I'm just using a quick link swivel and then a skin link boom with a loop long enough and then a little short anti-tangle sleeve, so that I don't have to worry about trying to get this anti-tangle sleeve over the knot, because that's a massive knot. That's a small anti-tangle sleeve and it really doesn't work. So if you want to use one of these short sleeves, then just make a long loop. That's a 3.5–4 centimetre loop. It's not a problem. The carp don't care that there's a big knot there. That did 2 bites, that did 1 bite. Just with my nail there I can tell that that hook point is gone. Oh wow, yeah, that is like a banana. So what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to chop the pop-up off, and then I'm just going to chop the chod link filament section off, and that is in the recycling bin. That's the boom element. That's £35 skin link, and that is a swivel knot bead. It's just the small one, I think, or might be the medium one, but that is perfectly heavy enough to fish these 12mm pop-ups, but be over heavy. So if your pop-up weight is only just heavy enough, the pop-up will just kind of dance around like that, and I never fish a pop-up like that. When I fish a pop-up, I want plenty of weight to keep it nailed down like that, and then that allows the top section to spin. If that can float around, then there's just likely to hook a carp's fin or hook him on the outside of the mouth, and we don't want to do that. That's not fishing. This was my second rod that I just wound in, and I wound it in while the other fish was in the net, because there's no way I wanted to have a take while I was trying to photograph the other one. That hook is pretty much perfect, so apart from putting a new pop-up on, I can reuse that. So what do we need to do in order to get myself back in the game here? So on this board here, I've got some chod link filaments all tied up, ready with a size 6 twister, hand sharpened hook. So all I've got to do is take one of those off, get my reusable boom section here, and then I'm just going to connect these up. So I've pre-cut that so that when I put that micro rings swivel halfway along there, I'm going to get the length I want, but still have enough material to work with. And the knot I'm using is the 2-turn blood. That's the knot ready to tighten up. Now you could do this with 2 pairs of rig pullers, but there's actually, in this pair of scissors, there's a little hole, and if you put the hook in there, I found that you can turn this pair of scissors into a bit of a multi-tool really, because it's also doubles as a rig puller. So rig puller on that end, scissors there with a hook through the hole. Takes quite a lot of force to nestle that down. Rated at £25, it's 0.50 ultra stiff bristle filament. It's very, very strong stuff. When I want to put a curve in, I can just do that. I could also just steam it. That's how the rig is going to sit on the bottom. Because I'm out tomorrow, we can get a couple of pop-ups out and get these pre-tied on. I wouldn't ever put pop-ups on, you know, multiple days in advance, but yeah, less than 24 hours, that's fine. So I'm just going to use a 10cm bit of floss. I'm using pink just because I fancied using pink. I don't really pay a lot of attention to bait colour, to be honest, having caught thousands of carp on dull bottom baits over the years. I just don't worry about colour. Pick a colour, use a colour, and if you've got a sharp hook and good rig mechanics, it's going to work. Very, very neat way of doing it, very effective. So this one can go on the board. No, it's not going to maintain the curve in the shod filament. I do not care, I do not worry. That's good enough to get me to the river. And you might notice I'm not using a conventional stiff hinge rig here in terms of how the bait is mounted. I'm using a bait loop style mount. There is no mini ring swivel, there's no micro ring swivel. It's just a loop of mono that I've tied when I've created the knotless knot, and it's brilliantly effective. You can tie a bait loop rig in supple braid or in a stiff bristle filament, doesn't matter. So that's my rig board all prepped, and that's just a day session. I'm going to use 3 rods tomorrow, so I've got 4 rigs ready to go, so that's 1 for each rod and then 1 spare just in case I get a quick take, and then I've got 4 replacement chod links all ready to go to replace these hooks as and when they get ruined. Okay, so I've been fishing with this stiff hinge rig variation now for the last 3 weeks. I've clocked about 7 sessions and I've caught 4 nice river carp, which is great. Not once have I got hooked up on the bottom, which is also a big plus for me. So on that front, it's job done. They're very effective. So if you're fishing over rough ground and that's a problem for you, then just popping it up 4 or 5 centimeters, it works. What's interesting is that on the retrieve, the hooks haven't always come back perfect. Don't think just because you've got a stiff hinge on that you're not going to have problems, or you don't have to maintain your hook point, because you absolutely will. You know, it does dink on the retrieve, just fractionally, but certainly enough to either cause you a hook pull or cause you to blank in the first place. So there's no way that I can just redo the rods halfway through the session without inspecting those hooks and expect to catch anything. That ain't gonna happen. I'm very happy with the hook holds that I've got. They've all been in the bottom lip as you'd expect with a rig like this. Nothing in the scissors. I'm fishing barbless, so I just unhook them in the net. And I'm certainly very happy with the way it casts as well. The rigs go out clean, they come back clean, 0 tangles, exactly what I'd expect and what I'm looking for. So I wanted to walk you through my 2025 river carping setup. On the rod front, I'm using the 9-foot 3-pound scopes. Used these for a few years on the river now, and I absolutely love these rods. I partner these with the Shimano 14,000 XTCs, lightweight, powerful, can stop anything that I'm going to hook. For mainline, I'm sticking with the 40-pound high line that I used last year. So that's a neutral buoyancy braid, incredibly strong, very abrasion resistant, but you do need to add a leader at the business end, so I've added 5 meters of 0.50 mono snag leader just to build a bit of elasticity into the system. I know the high vis colour isn't for everyone, but actually I really enjoyed fishing with it, especially early in the morning and the low light levels and late at night as well. Playing a carp at dusk, it's really difficult to see your line if you're fishing standard green line, and the high vis, especially with my eyesight, let's face it, I'm getting old, folks, and I need a bit of help. I need to see where my lines are, and if I can't see where my lines are, then it's going to be nip one, pearl one. I can get myself in an awful mess really quickly. The other advantage of using a really thick and strong braided mainline is that if I do get a lead trapped or a hook stuck on a rock, then I can actually pull for a break. It's strong enough to bend a hook open. It is monstrously strong stuff. As long as I've done a really good job of leading up and everything I do is tested anyway, then yeah, I've got no issues. So if something goes wrong, I've got no boat, I can just pull for a break, get everything back, and I'm not leaving stuff in the river. I cannot stand losing gear because it's just hazardous to fish, even if it was safely set up in the first place. Last year I used the 0.60 mono snag leader at the business end, and although it's monstrously strong and very abrasion resistant, it doesn't cast very nice. Even if I'm only using 5 meters of it, it was a bit of a bitch. So I've gone back to the 0.50, but I've added 1 meter of rig tubing for extra durability, extra abrasion resistance. On the lead system front, I'm back to the tried and tested that I've been using for the last 3 years. That's the Nash heli sleeve combined with a Fox run ring. I really like the Fox run ring because I can break it at 10 pound of force, so I have no issues with the main line that I'm using, applying 10 pound of direct load and breaking off a lead if I have to. It's rare, but it happens. But it's important to me that I've got the right setup to be able to do that if it does happen.